We acknowledge the Ancient Ones, the Greater Shamanic Council of Light, Hermes, both Trismegistus and Seshet, Lady of the Measuring Cord, as above so below, as within so without. We acknowledge Imhotep, architect of the cosmos. May the earth be the mirror of heaven. We acknowledge the sacred order of the Magi, and all throughout history who knew, like now, a turning of the ages. We acknowledge the master builders of Göbekli Tepe and the great shining ones at Kalash, the courage and knowledge of the Polynesian wayfinders traversing the great oceans. We acknowledge the prophetic traditions of Ezekiel and Daniel, the traditions of Avalon, the Merlin, and the Round Table, the calendric wizardry of the Maya, and the Venus teachings from Mesoamerica, the Jupiter teachings originating in China, and the Vedic lunar mansion traditions, the Babylonian and Sumerian sidereal zodiacs, the brilliant Hellenistic invention of the seasonal zodiac. The Neolithic peoples around the planet, some still today, honoring the sacred connection between the land and the sky. The Tuatha De Danann in Ireland, who created a time of 2,000 years of peace, the builders of Newgrange. My teachers that are not in human form, Mount Shasta, the Grandfather Rock at the Wonderland of Rocks in Joshua Tree, Mount Haleakala on Maui, the Fish Lake Valley, Hierophany, and the sacred landscapes around the planet, the astrosophy of Rudolf Steiner, and the esoteric astrology of DK in the Tibetan, both presaging the shamanic astrology paradigm, and particularly the archetypal visions of C.G. Jung and the cosmology of my mentor, Dane Rijar. For these and more, we give
monthly vlogcast here that we generally do around the full moon time. And I'm here to join me for a great dialogue and inquiry with Levi Banner over there in Bali. And he has actually a background in the subject that we're going to be talking about today, which is what is it about shamanic astrology that is shamanic? So this is a question that comes up a great deal, and Levi has prepared a great number of sort of visual aids as we can go through this investigation here for you all today. I sure have gotten this question a lot ever since this has been called shamanic astrology, and I want to give a little background about how that all happened. You want to put up the first
yeah. Just want to say hello, everyone, and happy to be here. And this is definitely a topic that I get asked. It's definitely a question I've been asked quite a lot. So let's see here.
Here we have the logo of the school, and one of the mottos of the school, living the magic of earth and sky. We'll be taking a look at this logo in a deeper view of it later in our sharing today.
Indeed.
So, just a little bit of a backstory. I got involved in astrology back in 1969, 1970. Got involved with what at that point was called humanistic astrology. But a few years later, Dane Rijar, who was the one who led that movement, changed the name to transpersonal astrology. And then during the 70s, Levi, it's really interesting. And when I look back on some of my old records, I saw old business cards of mine that said transformational astrology.
Interesting. That's a good name.
In the 70s and through the early 80s, that was one of those words that kind of like shamanism to shamanic today that got added on to a lot of things, you know. Indeed. So this was transformational astrology. But then what happened, and I'm not going to go through the entire story on this here, which is what happened was that in 1981, I did a vision quest with Joan Halifax, And all through the 80s, I worked with Native American teachers. I specifically was interested in vision quest experiences. That was the thing that I most resonated with. And it was in the process of doing all of that that I reacquainted myself with my love for the night sky. And at that point, I was doing all these different experimental groups of taking people out to sacred sites, connecting them to the sky, working directly with the land and the sky, and then having the different transmissions and new ingredients of what the shamanic astrology paradigm ended up becoming, even though at that point I didn't call it that. In fact, at that point, all through the 80s, before the school got formed, there wasn't really an official name other than Astrological Vision Quest, which was essentially what we were doing. And then that was during the time period when there's a lot of pushback, problems that some of the Native American groups had with the use of the word vision quest. So therefore we stopped using that. It's the same thing that happened with the School of Lost Borders. They used to do what was called Vision Quest, and then they changed it to Vision Fast and sensitivity to the Lakota. But anyway, that was the original stuff that was happening that became shamanic astrology. And then the name was, the word shamanic was then, attached to the type of astrology that I'd been developing over the years. So we do have that name, shamanic astrology, but it's actually still to this day, to this day causes some kind of controversy. And people are, often ask me, well, as we'll see when we get into this, and I know you've had experience with this too, that someone will come up to me and say, oh, shamanic astrology. So how do you do drum journeys with the stars? That would be one question, right? Or very often it would be, oh, shamanic astrology. So what plant medicines do you favor? Those two, in fact, maybe we'll
exactly
next and share about the same thing here. Levi.
That's exactly the questions I get. Absolutely.
The other one, by the way, is they'll say, are you a shaman?
Sure.
And at least in my view, and different people have different approaches to this, I'm more likely in a whimsical way to say, I do not consider myself to be a shaman. I'm more of a wizard. But if I had to say which archetype, right? But the astrology is shamanic,
Indeed.
So our conversation here today is on that subject. Why in the world, out of all the different words that could be used to describe this style of astrology, why shamanic? And I have to be very honest, there have been times over the last 10, 15 years, because of the controversies that have come up over this word, that I've sometimes wondered, why in the world did we use this name? It would have been better to use something else. However, it works. People know it this way. And I haven't been able to think of anything else. I've had people saying things like, maybe call it three worlds astrology, or somebody else said, call it initiatory astrology. All those things are part of shamanic astrology, as we'll see.
Indeed. Perhaps wizardry astrology. So absolutely. So maybe the first topic is, why would we, what is a shaman? And like, what do people even mean or know when they're even asking that? I know for it's so okay. So let's talk about shaman. Like, what is a shaman, and what isn't, and all these kinds of things. I think is a good starting point. And
well, this is this wiki definition. It's really
just Wikipedia.
Right, and then in Wikipedia, there's a far longer description, including very deep academic research and
in shamanism.
about where the word comes from, and I don't know. I mean, there's no point in doing that whole academic investigation right here, but probably the one that makes the most sense is the one that's mainly used, which is it comes from the Tungusic word Shaman, and it means one who knows, one who knows. And there are certain things that had been always involved in the shamanic traditions, which I personally think, and we've talked about this, before we came on the air here, that I think it was very much a global animistic way of relating to our connection to the earth and sky. And it wasn't owned by any one religion or any one place. It was like kind of a worldwide approach. They didn't always use the exact same practices, depending on the terrain, the climate, even in a place like Peru, where it could easily be said that they do shamanic practices, and they would probably agree with that, they would probably say that. But there would be, depending, if you're in the mountains, it's prayer and meditation, right? If you're in the jungle, it's very specific plant medicine. If you're on the coast, it's another kind of plant medicine, but it's all based upon connecting with the other world in some way, and then wanting to connect in a way that helps, to create a connection to who we really are. And that was very much connected, of course, with traditional medicine and the pre-technological way of understanding who we are as human beings.
So I want to bring up like that concept and accusation around being a shaman or not, or being shamanic or not, or cultural appropriation and these kinds of things that are often projected onto us. Like I might have a drum in the work that I, like I've had a poster of a training that Daniel and I do, and it's me with a drum, and it's like, oh, are you taking that? Aren't you taking that from the Native Americans? And I've never been. I have really good friends that are Native Americans that love this astrology that I've shared with them, just as an example. And I've never been accused of that by a Native American, of like stealing their drum. And what we're looking at here is a shaman that's not from Native America. And it's what I'm fascinated with is the cross culture throughout time and history, similarities. So what you've touched on is the different ways that shamans will do things, which we can get more into as well, but also the similarities that even the term shaman, which is not used by the Native Americans, they call it a medicine man. It's not a shaman, anyways. I mean, we might say that because English uses it now in a certain way, but the whole word we're saying is probably coming from that Siberia in that area, right. Maybe, And it's like, so that's hilarious. It's just a funny thing that the people, somebody that might approach me that way kind of doesn't probably understand that, and so it's quite fascinating. Siberia and India and South America, Central America, all across the world, they use drums, medicine wheels, they pray to the directions. I mean, it's always surrounding prayer and altered states and and healing and all these really basic kind of human things. Animistic cultures throughout the world are using these, have shamans, and they may or may not call it that, but that word, as many words, gets transformed and used in different ways.
So just like transformational, it's like now you can add shamanic to anything you want.
Exactly.
And then so it ends up becoming diluted as far as what we're actually meaning when we're using the word, at least in this kind of astrology. It's not a dilution. It's a way of distinguishing this very much from a more mainstream intellectual kind of astrology, and one that actually embraces the global tradition, the whole planet, including our previous the previous versions of who we are before hierarchical patriarchy, if we would say it that way, and plus the ingredient, which is it's about healing.
Absolutely.
So the word is, it can produce controversy, but we want to be very clear as we're going through this this presentation that no cultural appropriation is intended. But
Yeah.
your story brings up something that just to give you the opposite side of the story. I don't know if I ever shared this with you. In the 1980s, there was a very fundamentalist version of the Lakota
Yeah.
that actually said, we own the drum.
Interesting.
And they would send actually hit squads, believe it or not, to white people who were using the drum. So that was like the other extreme, because you can find fundamentalism anywhere.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And perhaps they weren't aware of the fact that it's been, before their time used in
Right.
Possibly.
But at the same time, I'm sympathetic to the fact is that they would see how their culture had been destroyed. And
also, that was probably true.
The neocolonialism and the imperialism and actually, we know the purposeful desire of the colonists and the conquistadors and so on to destroy as much as possible of the indigenous traditions, which is still going on today. So I don't blame them for sometimes having extreme reactions. Yeah.
Indeed.
So here's some of the terminology that we use within the shamanic astrology paradigm that distinguish it in a lot of ways from other kinds of astrology. I've already mentioned about the vision quest. It used to be called astrological vision quest. And that was because the original transmissions and work that came through was taking people out on the land under the sky and seeing how astrology works when people have that direct experience of the sky. And then, as you can see here, it's ceremony. And in many ways, the way ceremony works is based on archetype. There's different ways to do ceremony, not just one way. So what I would like to say is that within the tradition of our school, the ceremony starts with simply being aware of what's taking place. It's like knowing when, for example, there's a Moon-Venus conjunction, being in touch with the moon cycles and then doing some conscious alignment with those astronomical, stellar, and calendric cycles. And then depending, if you have a lot of, say, Virgo, you may want to do elaborate ceremony. But then other kinds of approaches might be, okay, well, we know the time now, let's put our attention on that, or just like go outside and connect with it, watch it, So there's no dogma as how to do ceremony, but rather it's a way of simply connecting and being aware of it. Anything thoughts on that, Levi?
Oh, I mean, these are just terminologies that we're using in our school, just a few of them, and there's many others in which you might find in the, normal ceremonial jargon of of people that are holding ritual spaces and doing shamanic practices. And so we are really kind of borrowing from many different traditions, and so our perspective is coming from, I think that the point I was even making earlier with maybe that we are actually quite sensitive around the different cultures and cultural appropriation and these kinds of things. And Daniel created this term far before it was actually really trendy. Shamanic.
Oh, right, indeed.
Right. It's actually, these are like way ahead of the game there, actually. And I'm finding it in a younger generation, and it's just really widespread. And so yeah, we're in that pool, but it's coming where our perspective is coming from, like honoring all these traditions. And I think we're not the ones appropriating as much. You know, it's more like, wow, we're really honoring these perspectives that are coming through different times and different places, and really getting as much as we can with and honoring them, and utilizing those. It's like, wow, we really left out this deep wisdom in our Western culture. We miss this really deep wisdom of how they looked at a calendar, or how they tracked these planets, or how they lived their life in community. And indigenous cultures, animistic cultures, through prayer, through meditation. And so actually, I think we're actually coming from that
Yeah.
perspective, being connected with that.
And actually, from my perspective, it's like this came through in the 80s. It's like, how can you possibly be an astrologer if you don't know the sky? If it's only something that operates out of your brain knowledge or intellectual knowledge, then you've lost maybe more than half of it. So that was our commitment in the school, to have people know that part. But back to the ceremony point. I mean, this is something we've tried to distinguish in our school, that there's a difference between the use of the word ceremony and the use of the word ritual. If you use the word ritual, it suggests something you do the same way, like a Catholic Mass would be a ritual, the same way each time. While a ceremony is in present time. It's always like the way they would say, a jazz musician might say, never the same way once, which is that you're always connected to that, the multiplicity, the infinity of possible combinations that are happening at any moment with an astrological or calendric timing. And so that's what you connect with. And it's not like, oh, somebody's watching to make sure you're doing it right. There's a great deal of freedom in it that goes along with the amount of knowledge that a person has gained regarding the seasons and the cycles, which then brings us to initiation. I mean, one of the main ingredients of shamanic astrology is that no cycles are in and of themselves good or bad. Each one represents a specific kind of initiatory process. And that would, I would say, be one of the core points, is we'll see when we get to the end of a presentation, like what are the summary of what makes shamanic astrology unique. But this process of initiation is a way of then being in harmony and connection to what the intent is of timings, of planetary timings, of universal intent. We're in touch with it, and different initiations happen at various points. And none of them, as I said, are good or bad. This involution point. Now, this is something I find very intriguing, because in Tibetan, in Buddhism, for example, and I was a Buddhist scholar for a long period of time, the Dalai Lama did something pretty radical at one point when he decided to elevate Tibetan Bun shamanism to be at the same level as the theocratic Buddhist traditions, and which actually blew the minds of those. They didn't like it, actually. The heads of Theravada, the heads of Mahayana didn't. So what are you doing bringing that in? Because one of the differences between main Buddhism, the primary schools of Buddhism, we need to get off the wheel. While in core shamanism, while there is the desire to connect with the spirit realm, of course, there's something more than just our physical existence, but a typical shamanic approach is more involution. It's like bringing spirit into matter. It's an embracing of our humanness, not some kind of rejection of what it is to be human. And I know, Levi, I'm sure you've had a chance to be around shamanically oriented people. They have a very earthy approach. They have a sense of humor that's very different than the sophisticated Western people. They're very earthy, down to earth. They value being human. And that's what we mean by involution here, spirit into matter.
Yeah, quite different than the always up and out spiritual kind of
Yeah,
crowd. You know,
right.
astrology is this big, you know, it's like really grounded in a different way.
Right. Even, how can we be around that shaman when that shaman smokes tobacco, or
Right.
something like
Yeah.
that.
Eats
Yeah.
meat. Yeah.
Not that they all do, but I mean, just the kind of judgments it's so easy to make regarding that kind of stuff. The three worlds approach, um, that's gone into depth at other times and other presentations, but just very simply, shamanic astrology has borrowed from what seems to be a universal principle in virtually every indigenous or animistic, pre current time Western culture, which is to divide our experience into three worlds: upper world, middle world, underworld. And so we divide actually the planetary initiation processes into those three. So Uranus and Neptune would be upper world, and Jupiter and Saturn, the nodes, middle world, Pluto, Chiron, probably Eris, underworld. So it's like recognizing all three as part of our experience. And so that's a key factor. Do you want to discuss the psychopomp part?
Just and yeah, just I find it fascinating the three worlds as well. Just how cross cultural and how throughout time that's found
Yeah.
as I was bringing up, such as praying to the directions and uh, banging on a drum, going into altered states. It's like there's so many linked connections between these indigenous and animistic cultures, and that just that view that's so widely shared of having three worlds in one is quite fascinating. So of course we've embraced that. Psychopomp is kind of a term used for somebody that guides souls through the death experience, and that's also kind of widely found in different cultures as well. Is that the shaman is kind of like somebody that's walking people into different realms, into the different worlds. Um, and so we're using psychopomp in, when we discuss our, we're always looking for like, what is the myth that's connected from an ancient culture? What were there myths that actually connect to the planets, such as the Inanna story with Venus and so on? And when we're looking at Mercury, it's like, what is connected with that? It's like, how would the ancient cultures see that? And so we're using psychopomp usually in the Mercury experience, or the Mercury synodic cycle, where it's so close to the sun. It's like it's going near the sun and coming back quite quickly, and it's almost like bringing back wisdom from source, from the sun, from great mystery. And we'll get into it more later, but the idea of the underworld and just being a planet being so close to the sun you can't see it, so is also widely found as well. But Mercury goes quite quick and is almost like it's a messenger in certain mythologies. So
Yeah, because it's so fast and so close to the sun, it's the one that dives in and out of both underworlds more than any other planetary symbol. And so it's funny
it's like
because
the professional messenger there. Yeah.
yeah. But it's one of the things we've extended to the imagery is that the psychopomp is not just one who helps a person go in and out of the underworld, there to say into the death realm and back, but also into the most extreme experiences of the celestial realm and then brings them back. So it involves the celestial or universal underworld as well as the underworld that involves actually the deathing experience, So it's all of that, to be a guide for souls,
The guide.
someone who knows all the pathways. And so rather than in other kinds of shamanism where it's like, oh yeah, you connect with your eagle or you connect with your you know, with your bear or something, animals or your plants. Nothing against that at all, but this is just including the planetary essences and the star essences, you know, as part of our way of connecting into the shamanic magic.
Yeah, it's like saying the planets themselves are bringing us in and out of the three worlds. They are giving us initiations constantly.
Yeah.
We are going through initiations because of the cycles of the planets. And Mercury itself is the psychopomp, bringing in and out information in us and our consciousness through, you know, great mystery and back.
Yes.
So it's like the planets are the shamans in a way.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's what we connect to in order to participate
Medicine.
in the magic. Yeah. And then this
So
other point is go ahead, sorry.
no, that exactly, you know, and so we base it off of archetypes, and I know that you're very passionate about this last point.
Yeah, so like in the ancient world, there would be like an externalization of what we could call today the psychological archetypes, you know, so it was in the forces of nature. It would be actually in Greece, you know, you'd have statues of the different gods and goddesses that represented what people were familiar with, you know, as far as their inner states. Each culture did that. You know, I love to see, for example, the similarity between Saraswati and Sophia. You know, the different images of elements of different expressions of the archetypal feminine and masculine in different cultures. Aphrodite being another great one. But what's happened is that while we still in the school will use imagery of goddesses and gods, which is the old way of looking at it, the soul being polytheistic. In the modern language, it's psychological, you know, archetypal expressions, of which in shamanic astrology we have 24. You know, 24 gods and goddesses operating out of the 12 different mystery schools of life. There could be more or less, but that, you know, you kind of have to I always like to say, have to cut the pie of life somewhere. So I kind of like the geometry, the metrology of using 12 times 12, 144, or 12 mystery schools, and then you have the masculine and feminine, so you have 24. That's just the way we see that ability to as honoring the polytheistic soul. We're dethroning the relic of patriarchal consciousness, which is to have the one God ruling above all, like the sun sign stuff, right? So we're looking at more than that.
So we've already kind of touched on this quite a bit, just the different practices found in animistic and indigenous and shamanic cultures throughout the world, and how there are, you know, across the board, a use of a drum or trance states through, say, dancing around a fire in many different ways, journeying. I loved how you put, you know, in some places you're in the mountains, you're going to be more into prayer and meditation and go inward, and then maybe, you know, in other places you're going to be more into the journey work with the drum and these kinds of things. And then, of course, you know, even from the beginning, there's entheogenic plant use. You know, from maybe even in Siberia, they were using that
Amanita
original
muscaria, right?
the Amanita muscaria, which is kind of it has to do with the origins of Santa Claus and the stockings over your chimney and the whole Christmas story and things like this. Something to look into if you don't know those kinds of things. But yeah, the whole origin of the word is coming from people that are using plants, and throughout cultures they did that, but not always either, you know. This Paco in Peru here that we're looking at, you know, some of them, of course, there's the cactus there, the San Pedro, but they're very, very into prayer there, just really doing these like mesa spreads. They carry these bundles of stones that they divin with, and they divin with the coca leaves and these kinds of things. So it's not always like going into these radical psychedelic states just to do, be a shaman, and that's also a misconception that shamanism is only with ayahuasca or something like that.
Right.
And again, that's not a word that's widely used in, say, South America. This is a Paco. This is not a shaman. We might say that, but we're projecting that. There's much different terminologies, but yeah.
And also, I mean, if you are in those traditions a practitioner, someone whose primary job is to be a healer, then their primary medicine, we could say their practice, it might be to use those plants a lot, right? But for the average individual, it would only be done under certain primary powerful ceremonial timings. So in shamanic astrology, there's a huge emphasis in our school, and when you get a session with a shamanic astrologer to create the timings. Like I, for example, I absolutely love it when I see Jupiter going to hit the North Node, or a person. I could list 7 or 8 of these different kind of timings where what is it you most love to do to vision? What do you most love to do in order to connect to your future self, or to that guidance that comes beyond your normal consciousness? Well, that would be the timing. For a few people, that might be, that's all. This is when I went to the jungle, or this is when I did the silent retreat, or this is when I went the dark retreat, or this is when I did the 20-day fast. There's different things you can do, but to honor those timings, that's a very important part of our work.
Highly encouraging and informing the soul of their ceremony, of their initiation, and highly encouraging ceremony work around that, journey work around that, and we're just not subscribing to one.
It's really by archetype, so that's often
Totally.
The question I ask, which is, okay, what is it you've always what is it that's expanded your vision the most, and different people have different answers, of course. And there's also cases of individuals, I don't know what mine is, right? And then you can look at the chart and you can say, well, gee, it looks like you got Scorpio rising here. Well, have you ever considered doing shamanic breath work, right? Or they have a Gemini rising. Have you ever considered trying some Zen meditation? I don't know. I'm just making stuff up right now.
I love that. Yeah, I love that as in this kind of modern time when we do have access to all this ancient wisdom in a way, or we're just very aware of all these different ways to work with the spirit world, we can look at it archetypally, and that you don't have to just fit into the village that you're grown up in. You guys just do it that one way in the mountains. It might be more fitting for that soul in this modern time to do their ceremony in a certain way, and that we have access to that. It's quite a blessing.
I actually, just to make it even, to turn it around, to turn this conversation on its head, if a person has Mars in Cancer or Cancer rising, it might be, look, you've been spending far too much time away from your family, and maybe the best thing in the world for you to do would be hang out with your kids for longer.
Which is such a beautiful ceremony, and we really, it's another act of indigenous wisdom that we don't embrace enough. It's living together in a village.
Yes, indeed.
It's a beautiful ceremony, being with family. I can say that. All right. Well, this is another incredible connection of wisdom throughout the planet and throughout history that I know you have really connected to and is really inspired. And this is really a main point of what's really inspired your creation of shamanic astrology. So tell us about your experience with sacred sites and
yeah. Well, it started with the Vision Quest of Mount Shasta, And it was so overwhelming at Mount Shasta that I ended up going there every August for 9 years in a row. And at the end of that time period, I actually at one time took 50 people into a deserted valley up against the mountain. And we were there for a week. We took a camp kitchen in for 50 people. That was wow, that was amazing. And then also Joshua Tree was a very important original place for me. But probably the thing that blew me open the most was the Callanish experience in 1987. But I've had this absolute love of these sacred sites all over the world, but particularly the ones in Scotland, Ireland, and Wales, and the American Southwest. I would say those are the areas that that have meant the most to me. And I don't want to forget this, the magical ones on the Big Island in Maui. Haleakala had a major influence in my life. I did 50 backpacks into Haleakala, and that's where I experienced the most profound level of silence that I've ever experienced. And climbing Mauna Loa and going into the deep lava tubes on the Big Island. Those were also really important places where my own personal experience came from, that then inspired a lot of the stuff that went into the school and into the paradigm. You've done, I think, a lot of the same stuff. I mean, you've been gravitating more, I think, to South America.
Indeed, I remember we took a little trek to this place in Indonesia quite a few years ago. Pretty unexcavated. It's called Gunung Padang, and it could be one of the oldest or the oldest sacred site, that we've kind of started to dig up. And it was quite a profound experience doing that with you. It's massive, multi-layered pyramid temple that's highly unexcavated in Java. But yeah, absolutely. And also been to the 8,000-year-old stone circles in Portugal with you, and at the equinox, to watch the sunset exactly over that massive stone that who knows how they got it there directly over that, and that's something that's so incredible, that we've always tracked these things, and that and of course it's such an inspiration. It has to have been an inspiration for what astrology is, for what it ever was, for how it ever came to be. It's like what is a shaman, but what is an astrologer? What is it like? Where did we even get
and in fact that these traditions go much further back than
exactly
what most people today might say. Well, what's astrology? Well, it's that horoscope I'm looking at. Those things did not even exist until at the earliest 300-400 years BC. So individual charts were not really what it was about. It was about clan, tribe, and whether you were located in one place or you were a hunter-gatherer or whatever it might be, you had these connections with the land and the sky. You were connected to the earth and the sky. You were part of it, and you would continually be in a place of prayer and reverence, with our gratitude to be part of such a magical world. And later on came an individual chart, and that's what people think astrology is. That's part of it, of course. It's an important part. What is your place in the big story? But this whole thing has gone on for a very long period of time. And the more research that is done, the longer we can see that awareness goes back.
And isn't it fascinating that the oldest temple sites and pyramids and the lot are almost always connected with some sky alignment? It's like a grounded earth sky alignment.
As above, so below, bringing the heavens to earth. That's the project.
It's the basis of our like culture in the past, and so this is where astrology comes from. So it's quite an incredibly simple and beautiful thing that you've brought to our awareness, Daniel, or just around honoring that ceremonially and calling it shamanic and whatever, you could call it sacred. It's just like what is astrology, and I'm really feeling like it's more to the point. It's a more grounded approach of just saying like, well, we've always done it this way.
Yeah. Well, and I sometimes I like to share with astrology groups, the ones that are maybe are not used to what we're talking about, that astrology is the highest of the lower mysteries. So during the high culture, they knew that astrology included everything, and included physics, it included alchemy, it included medicine, it included geometry, it included metrology. I mean, it included everything, and it was within this larger context of what the human mind can know. But there wasn't. But it also didn't have the presumption of knowing everything. It always was in honoring of great mystery, the unknowable. So no astrologer can pretend to think they know it all. It's that because we're part of the unfoldment of this phenomenal great mystery, and it's our privilege to be able to participate together with it. So but astrology incorporates so many different things, and particularly if we bring in more factor than simply individual horoscopes. Yeah, so this kind of summarizes a lot of the stuff we're talking about.
Yeah.
The experience of our relationship between earth and sky, the night sky studies, learning the night sky. We've discussed ceremony, being aware of the timings, the sacred site connections. And eventually, I mean, I should mention this, when you take our trainings, and you get a full certification in these teachings, part of it is actually to have a regular relationship with a sacred site, but that could be something you create yourself. If you have a piece of land, you put up a stone circle, you might be near a place that it was used for that reason, and you form a regular connection with that place during the different seasons, and then you form a living relationship with the land and the sky and the seasons and the stars, and that's actually one of the graduation ceremonies that we use in the school.
Yeah, and that really to me was a huge shift. It's actually even hard to explain the feeling you get from having an all-night vision quest, literally staring at the stars the whole time, and to track the stars through the year and through the years. And it's not common. You might think astrologers always know that, but it's actually very rare that astrologers have this really firm grasp of that connection, or of that understanding of how everything's moving around us, or how we're moving through space, or how everything's moving around us. And so it's really special to have this this paradigm and this teaching, and this way of kind of going back to something so simple and but yet so profound, of just connecting where you are on the land to what's moving and how it might be influencing us, and ceremonializing that experience through your through your knowledge of that.
It's actually so incredibly helpful. I mean, this is one of the things which we talked about at the beginning of our conversation, is that there's certain practices, certain understandings that the shamanic and animistic cultures have around the world. And one of them is like the concept of the four directions. Right? And if you, this has very practical application. There could be a time period in your life where you're falling apart, where you're lost, you're confused, you're in the underworld, and so on. It happens to the best of us. I mean, there's no way to get out of it at some point, right? So one of the best possible ways to get grounded and get centered is just start simple like that. Get on the ground and just connect to the four directions. And that puts you in a place of center, and then you can start to rebuild your connection to the land just from and the sky just from there. These are very practical techniques, actually, in order to reconnect to our basic humanity and to bring us back into a center, back into our center.
Yeah, the directions are something you can connect to even if you're in the city as well. And yeah, definitely something to emphasize that part of the discussion around cross history, connections, and the honoring of the directions. It's such a fascinating symbology, the medicine wheel, and the. Yeah, I was just actually, it's very recent for me. There's this symbol that's basically the Andean cross. It's called La Chacana in South America. From the Andes, the Inca cross.
Yeah.
And it's exactly the same as this really same symbol in Bali. I've come across. My friend just asked, what does this mean? And so we're just learning. It's called Tapak Dara, and it's basically has such incredible symbology. But just like La Chacana, there's three worlds. It's a calendar.
Yes.
It's talking about all the different months. It's talking about and it's the four directions. It's basically a cross with a bunch of extra. It's like a cross with a aura around it. So yeah, it's just this really incredible symbology that's found all across the world. And so the priests and the priests here, the local shamans, the Balyans, use that to find balance. And it has to do with balancing masculine and feminine, and it's just like the whole lot. Really, so I just learned about that one recently, and I've been seeing it. I was really wondering.
And then the understanding that a lot of the ancient petroglyphs, the spiral petroglyphs were connected to the sun and moon cycle, and then you have the swastika, not the reverse of it by Hitler, but the original Tibetan version. It's also for the four directions and the seasons are located.
Exactly. Gosh, we could go in so many directions with this conversations in history.
And so that just briefly, because we have a 5 like an online course and 5-day training in person, global cosmology and the turning of the ages. And the thing about this I wanted just to mention is that as much as possible, we wish to make this a global transmission, not one that is just European or, in traveling around the world so much, different sacred sites, areas, one discovers if you go to Malta, it's Malta-centric. It's all, this is the center of Atlantis, or if you go to South Africa, well, that's where it all comes from, right? Or there's a certain kind of, it's understandable, I guess, on a certain kind of cultural imperialistic view that we are the center, we're the ones but it's actually global, and we're trying to actually honor the different parts of the world and to get away from that there's just one place or like some people, it's all about Egypt, or no, we're talking about a global situation.
So what better word than shamanic,
Yeah, true. So this is like the summary of the 8 main points, and this can actually be found on the Shamanic Astrology website. So it all starts with as above, so below, as within, so without, as the truth of the fundamental truth of Shamanic astrology, and arguably of everything. The experiential and earth-centered aspect, the ceremonial and participatory, operating from a mythic perspective. In other words, ceremony is influenced by the cosmology, and then we participate with that. Here we see the death and rebirth motif of shamanism, and the involution evolution, which inspires shamanic astrology in 2 basic ways. Practitioner is trained to track and understand the planetary cycles and their relationship to the process of initiation. We discussed that. Shamanic astrology values the totality of the human experience, all of its light and shadow, equally honoring evolution and evolution. Involution and evolution, yes. This is not a light polarized approach. And as we indicated before, it's like truly value what it is to be human. And now these points 7 and 8, shamanic astrology especially values the divine feminine, the circle of grandmothers, and that the earth mother is ultimately whom we serve at its turning of the ages. In my second book, The Origins of the Shamanic Astrology Paradigm, I actually go into that in greater depth about first principle is the womb of creation. That first principle is archetypal feminine, actually. And a recent discovery of mine through the work of an author named Robert Lawler, who's I tremendously value now. When he looks at the ages of the yugas, he basically says the first three yugas are matrilineal, matriarchal, and it's only Kali Yuga that's patriarchal. And the purpose of the patriarchal Kali Yuga is actually to assist in the composting. So that it actually creates such a reaction that then everything goes into renewal. It's a very fascinating idea that I'm doing research into it right now. I need to update point number 8. Believes that the greater history of global humanity embraced collaboration, cooperation, and a system of non-ranking called Gylany between men and women, with little or no hierarchy or dominator ideals. What I would update, it's now 300,000 years. It's kind of like 12 times 12 precessional cycles, so slightly over 300,000 years. So that I think is a pretty good summary of the essence of the paradigm. And now this logo, from a turning of the ages and from a global perspective and a calendric perspective, is showing the way in which the signs and the constellations, the shapes of the constellations operate over time. The integration of the mystery, how different constellations inform the different signs, which gives us the framework about how different times in history are emphasizing different kinds of things. And we're in one of those great turning points now. We are the Magi again, the Magi, of course, being astrologers who became aware of when it was time for a great change to happen. And we are in a time of a great turning. We're at least in one of the 4 seasons, shifting into one of the 4 seasons. It's possible we're at the end of the beginning of an entire 26,000 year cycle. It's a great turning. It's not just some ordinary time. It's beyond the scope of our conversation today to go into the symbol in great detail. We have a lot of courses that go into that. Trying to imagine. Okay, so let me just turn it over to you. Do you think there's something here we maybe have left out as far as the essence of shamanic astrology and why in the world it's called that?
I think we could go in many different directions with it, but I think we answered the question for in short, for now, yeah, this symbol here is really reflective of what we're up to in the school and the awareness that we're bringing as shamanic astrologers to the world with the procession and honoring the different site, through the different sites and all these things.
I had one more thing. I had one more thing that I would like to maybe wrap this up with this. It's something that I think about all the time. What, within the framework of what we've discussed, what is the function of a shamanic astrologer? And if we know that we cannot know it all, if we are surrendered to great mystery, if we know that Gaia or the Great Mother or the Sacred Feminine is first principle, and we are in a great turning, what can the shamanic astrologer do? Well, firstly, those of us who are counselors, that are working with groups, that are teachers, we are assisting each individual to, as fast as they possibly can, become aware of what their purpose is, to know what their mission and purpose is on the planet, and that their chart is the exact perfect set of circumstances for the unfoldment of their soul. However, but on a larger level, what do? What is our function? Just as the shamans of old, as healers, would go to spirit and, in a sense, negotiate with spirit. You know, I mean, one of the translations of the word shaman in Central America was spirit lawyer. Spirit lawyer. So you would go to spirit. Shall we heal this person? You know, and spirit might say, that person, I don't know. They beat they basically have taken advantage of their community. They're, you know, selfish and blah blah blah. But then the shaman might say, but he loves his dog and really takes great care of his plants, you know. So then there's this thing back and forth, right? As there's a negotiation and to determine whether there would be a healing. So I think that, in a sense, as shamanic astrologers, we talk with the planets. We know there's something up here. We know we're not like controlling what's going to happen, you know, but could it in fact possibly be less suffering than more? Is it possible that there could be an outcome here that is truly harmonious and beautiful, and we make that? Somebody needs to talk to spirit that way, you know. And just as I was told once by one of my teachers, that why do we do ceremony? Because the spirits like it. You know? So if we have that communication with the planets, we have that communication with the stars, and we are making a good case for humanity. That's my hope.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you.
So that's our. Any final words?
No, I think that's good. I hope it answers the question. You know, there's lots of ways to work with the school. So if you're interested in that, you know, just get in touch and check out the courses that we're doing, and you could even become a shamanic astrologer. And you know, we're really promoting this shift in humanity and need more help. So join us.
Thank you very much for riffing with me about this.
Thanks, it's been an honor.
And Levi is also a shamanic breathwork facilitator and a yoga teacher. So it's just great to have him in the school with us.
Great honor. Thank you for all the work, Daniel, and thank you for the great conversation.
Indeed. Okay. Till next time. All right.
All right. Bye, everyone.